But this was never a Christian nation. The United States was founded, economic greed got the best of people, the natives were decimated, they were exterminated, slavery was built up to feed the demand, the desire, the hunger for power and for money, and all this was whitewashed as some kind of a Christian necessity. And the myth of Christian America was invented, and history was radically rewritten. And where are we today? Today, in Jerusalem, in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, one of the many famous fistfights broke out. And you can see it on YouTube. A friend sent me an email. It's only 4 or 5 minutes. It's so sad. It's really tragicomic. The thing about it is that Jesus renounced violence. Christian violence is completely antithetical to the nature of its founder. How do you know? Well, Matthew 5:21. You've heard it said, don't murder. I tell you, verse 22, if you're even angry with your brother, you're subject to judgment. If you shouldn't call him racha, you shouldn't even call him fool. You've heard it said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Exodus 21. I tell you, don't resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the left also. Did you know that the early church was pacifist? So pacifist that if you joined the army, you would be instantly excommunicated. How do I know that? Because hundreds of documents have survived from the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries before this monster, the church state, which we call Christendom, was formulated. Now I'm going to be stepping on some toes. But let me read you one of these early quotations. The whole world is wet with mutual blood. And murder, which is admitted to be a crime in the case of an individual, is called a virtue when it is committed wholesale. That is, on the level of the military. Another writer, when God forbids us to kill, he prohibits more than open violence that is not even allowed by the public laws. He also warns us against doing those things that are considered lawful among men. For that reason, it will not be lawful for a just man to engage in warfare, since his warfare is injustice itself. And if you're like me, that probably surprised you. It changed. By the end of the 4th century, this pivotal century, if you had become a Christian in the army and you tried to resign, you were guilty of a crime. So a total flip-flop. What is going on? So what I'm saying firstly is that authentic Christianity was pacifistic. I'm not saying quietistic. These were not people who said, let's just sit back, this world doesn't matter. No, they had a deep concern for this world and the world to come, to actively do good. And I must make a qualification also at this point. Christianity was never... Obviously, if a nation adopted this kind of policy, it would never survive. But only the minority were ever envisioned as even potentially being followers of Jesus Christ. And so there's no threat to a nation state in this respect. In fact, better citizens, people who pray and who respect and don't slander their leaders, could not be found. Theocratic states don't work. We had it in the period of Israel for around a millennium and a half. The Christians tried it for about the same length of time, 4th century until, sadly, very recently, it failed. And even the Muslims, since the 7th century, again, almost a millennium and a half, have been trying to create theocratic states. This not only takes away freedom, it simply doesn't work. And a few words about exclusivity. In the early church, the Jews were not forced to convert. As I reread the New Testament, and the last month I've been studying particularly the book of Acts, it's very, very obvious that Peter, Paul, and the others were all Jews. They never asked people to give up their Judaism. What they asked them to do was to follow the Messiah, Jesus Christ, who would come in fulfillment of Judaism. That is, Christianity was viewed as an extension of Judaism. They would have been offended and shocked if you'd said that you're not Jews. Even the Romans considered the early church to be Jewish. Yet even biblical Judaism is very exclusive. I know this goes against some things you've written in your books, but the first and second commandments, no God but me and no idols, requires a choice. That's exclusive. Deuteronomy 13. Even if a family member goes the wrong way, in the Old Testament it was a very severe penalty. Psalm 1, there are 2 ways, basically a right way and a wrong way. Psalm 1 is the introduction to the Psalms. Look at it, it's a short psalm. I think you'll see what I mean. Jonah 2:8, I thought of when Jonah in the belly of the big fish, he prays, those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. He's referring to the pagans, the sailors of chapter 1 of Jonah. I thought of the end of Zechariah 8. I thought of a lot of passages which show the exclusivity of Judaism. That sounds like a crazy thing to say, but I'm talking about historically in the first millennium BC and also the second millennium BC. According to Deuteronomy 18, the Jewish people must follow the Messiah or they'll be cut off from their own people. In Christianity, 1 Peter 3 talks about our interaction. If you're a Christian, how do you interact with outsiders? And it says with gentleness and respect. And if we're not interacting with gentleness and respect when we claim to be Christians, we're denying our faith. In short, truth is by its very nature exclusive. Rabbi Boteach, you wrote in Judaism for Everyone, Judaism is unique among the world's religions that it claims no copyright on or exclusivity to truth. It does not denounce other faiths as misguided or heretical. Do you consider my faith to be misguided? And I'm sure you'll address that later on. But if you do, you're excluding me, you're oppressing me, you're oppressing me, you're judging me.
You're a lot taller than I am.
I know. Let's not get into ageism, sexism, what is it, the different height? Altitudinalism, I don't know.
Giantism.
Giantism. Yeah, but I'm not going to die young. Okay, look. Tolerance doesn't mean that we agree with each other. In fact, it's impossible to tolerate each other if you have the same opinion. If you love the New York Giants, and I love the New York Giants, we don't tolerate each other. We're totally on the same page. Tolerance is when we disagree. And that's the real test of our heart and integrity, who we are. And so, I would, if we're so gracious to the point of bending over backwards, not to offend, then we're doing some interesting theological gymnastics, and we end up in incoherence. Besides, Christianity has an inclusive vision. Interracial churches before apartheid did exist in Africa. In South Africa, in fact, the fellow who helped me understand the gospel, who's here tonight, in fact, started an interracial church before apartheid came down. That's encouraging. That's a direct outgrowth of what Jesus did teach, not what he didn't teach. I've had the privilege many times of worshiping with Israeli and Palestinian Christians in Israel. Most recently, just a few weeks ago. It's fantastic to see people hugging each other who, if they didn't have faith, they might be tempted to kill each other. This last Sunday at church, Latinos, Asians, African Americans, and whites are sitting together. They're not just sitting together on Sunday. They're eating together. They're marrying each other. And this, I believe, is as it should be. Authentic Christianity is a religion of peace. Finally, at our last debate, Shmuley, you said that you hate Osama bin Laden, and you seem surprised that I am able to hate his actions without hating him personally. And so I close with the words of an ancient rabbi who said, "You've heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven."
Thank you very much, Dr. Jacoby. Before I pass the floor to Rabbi Boteach, just a comment about what do you say about the last verse of the words of the gospel, where it states, paraphrasing it, that any person who does not believe in what's written in these words of the gospel should be cursed and damned forever. Any comment on that verse?
Well, that's not an actual verse that says that, but the importance of belief, even the famous John 3:16 links belief with eternal life. If we sharpen the question, or we could bifurcate the question, do I believe it's essential to have faith? Yes, absolutely. What are the eternal consequences? Maybe we'll talk about that later on.
So isn't there also an exclusivity then if a person is cursed and damned forever if they don't believe in those words?
Okay, well, I think we could get those words actually from John 3:17 and 18. Okay, because whoever doesn't believe is already condemned, earlier on in the gospel. Yes, but that's an exclusivity, and I would simply say that truth is by its nature exclusive. And in a sense, the gospel is no more exclusive than the Torah is in the Old Testament. And I could quote from Psalm 147. I mentioned Psalm number 1. Deuteronomy 13 is a very extreme passage that even if one of your family members goes worshiping other gods, that's it, it's all over. And as the death penalty was in effect, something the early Christians rejected, you could actually make an argument that early Judaism is more violent than early Christianity. And if you're like me, that sounds a little crazy. But we look at the historical record, and if you accept that authentic Christianity is apolitical and pacifistic, I think we've got a case.
I will leave the rest to Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, but I have to say something about his height. As you know, Napoleon was a very short man, and once he was told about the height of a person, he said that the height of a person should not be measured from the ground to his head, but from his head to the sky. So, Shmuley, I guess you will be able to beat him up on this.
Well, of course, Napoleon ended up exiled on a lonely island.
That's right.
I just make sure. My wife came in late, and I think she's looking for a seat. Debbie, did you find a place to sit? Debbie, did you find a place to sit? Okay. I'm trying to be a gentleman over here. I'm trying to score some brownie points with my own wife.